talking about Greg Tepper. We had Greg on, and there was that breaking news. And I hope Greg doesn't think I was flushing him, that I didn't want to talk to him. It's just when something breaks on my beat and I'm on a radio show, I would love it if the host would say, "Look, you got work to do. Go get it." So we heard about the UIL announcement. We had Greg on for a minute. And I said, "Greg, we'll catch up with you another time. I know you got work to do. We're going to let you go." So anyway, hopefully Shehan can probably follow that up and tell Greg we didn't just dump him. We wanted to let him get his work done. Shehan joins us now. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing well. Don't you worry. I'll make sure and let Greg know that you didn't just kick him off the air.
Yeah, and I think we explained it well, but I mean, hey, if you've got, and I know you cover college as well as high school sports, and a lot of things. And by the way, I am a TexasFootball.com subscriber,
Well, thank
so
you very much.
I'm a customer. Um, but I've had this happen too. Like a recruit commits to Oklahoma State, and I'm on with some station. I'm like, man, I really would like to get my story up and be competitive, but and of course, they want you to talk on their radio. I understand it, but yesterday I felt sympathetic to Greg. It happened. I mean, the UIL announcement came out right before we had him on. I said, Greg, you got a busy newsroom there at Texas football. Go get it. So anyway, let's start with the Big 12, because when I open up my Texas football magazine, the first thing I read, and I told Greg this yesterday, is I read the opening forward or column by Dave Campbell. Dave and Reba Campbell were close friends with my parents. I understand Reba was lost this spring. I know I lost my dad last fall, my mom several years ago. So the greatest generation, we're losing them. But I'm just such a fan of Dave Campbell, and I grew up with him being a friend of my parents, so it was kind of cool. And then the second thing I go read is the Big 12 preview, and that's your product this year. Take me through your thoughts on the Big 12. I'm giving you a big canvas here.
No, well, I appreciate that. When you look at the Big 12 this upcoming season, I just think that the thing that stands out is how balanced it looks. Like last year, I think we saw a lot of that there were a lot of teams that were kind of in that middle conversation, but I do think that we're going to see more of those teams kind of move up to that top group and maybe compete for a shot at the Big 12 title game. Now, Oklahoma's still the standard bearer in the conference, and they've won, whatever, 5 in a row or whatever. So, you got to pick them to win until they don't. But I'm really interested with what Oklahoma State can do. I'm really interested with what Texas can do. I think Iowa State can break into that group. And obviously, you got Baylor and TCU, who are two teams who have been around that conversation forever. I think that this could be a really competitive year in the Big 12.
I agree with you, but I stop at 4. After I get past Iowa State, and I mean, you're right. Oklahoma is. I mean, I've pledged to vote for Oklahoma in the Big 12 media poll, and list them on our publication as tops until somebody beats them. You just kind of at this point you kind of have to do that. I think this is a really good football team for Oklahoma State, and I know a lot of people have question marks about what happened over the summer. As somebody who looks at this from a distance, let's start with that. Your thoughts on Oklahoma State? You probably in May thought, "Oh man, Mike Gundy's got a juggernaut," and by June it was like, "Oh gosh, Mike Gundy's got a bunch of problems." So how do you look at it?
I think it's going to depend a lot on how quickly he can rebuild that trust because look, all this stuff happened, but at least it happened more over the off season. It didn't bleed into camp. It didn't, you hope that this is something that they can get over because you look at the team that he brings in. I mean, this team has the potential to be as good as any team that he's had at Oklahoma State. Just with what they bring back on offense, obviously with Chuba Hubbard, obviously with the Biletnikoff finalist, obviously with Spencer Sanders getting a year better. He's the kid who obviously earned Mr. Texas football honors from us because we thought that he was the best player in the state. So we know how good this offense can be. And defensively, I mean, I don't need to tell you how much they have coming back on the defensive side of the ball, 10 starters, I believe. So this is a team that really has a chance to be perhaps the most complete team in the Big 12. Now, they don't necessarily have all of the top end talent all over the field the way Oklahoma does and the top end depth. But the thing is that if your top 22 is that good, and if you've got contributors at as many positions as they do, and have all that experience back on the offensive line, and have all that youth on the defensive line, there's a lot that can happen. And look, like you said, I mean, Mike Gundy has to get things back together. He needs to make sure that the team's on his side by the time that camp opens and games start. But when you look at this roster and at this team, I mean, I think that this is as good a team as Gundy's ever had.
All right, now let's just go ahead with the top four. Texas, I'm probably higher on them because I am a Mike Yursich fan. I got to know Mike really well when he was here. Coach Gundy lets the radio crew meet with the coordinators every week, so we met with Mike every week, and the guy is he's a heck of a smart football coach. Um, I know he's coaching now for a genius in Tom Herman, but Tom better understand Yursich knows a lot of offense. My problem, Shehan, is the defensive side because I thought they got rid of a guy that I really had a lot of respect for and thought he was a tremendous defensive coach. And I don't know how good Texas will be defensively. And I know they've got all the pieces. All those injured guys from last season are back, like Stearns and so forth. But uh, Texas is going to have to they're going to have to show me defensively that they'll be as good as most people hope. At least Longhorn fans hope they'll be.
Yeah, and I think that you really look at that back end for that Texas defense, and look, Caden Stearns is a known commodity. I think they've got some other safeties who have played pretty well back there, but I mean, I think that they finished number 127 last year in pass defense, and that's simply not good enough for a team that in 2018 had one of the greatest defensive back recruiting classes that we've really ever seen. And now they have a kid like Kobe Boyce who's retiring from football to focus on himself. Now they've got DeMarvion Overshone moving over to linebacker and so not being in that defensive backfield. Look, I think that they need some corners to step up, and we expected guys like Anthony Cook and Jalen Green to come in there and be big-time players right away. I mean, these were borderline five-star kids, but they haven't played to that level. And, you mentioned the change at defensive coordinator. I think that Todd Orlando really did a good job over his first couple of years there, and I am a little surprised how short his leash was when the defense struggled last year. But they bring in Chris Ash, whose whole deal is obviously developing defensive backs. He did it at an elite level at Ohio State especially. But, I mean, to get guys to learn a whole new system that quickly, I think that that's always going to be a tough thing to do. And it's always the tougher thing to do when you have a must-win season ahead.
Yeah, it's tough to coach the guys that are on injured reserve. And last year, Texas starting defensive lineup, a lot of them were over there on the sidelines. And
Right.
I can't hardly blame Todd Orlando for injuries. Coaches generally are not the reason players get hurt. All right, let's go to Iowa State, and I think everybody feels pretty confident that Matt Campbell is a heck of a coach. I think he's proven that. And if you go to sleep on Iowa State, you may go to sleep on the Big 12 winner because they're probably not, like you said about Oklahoma State. Maybe they don't have the exact right guy at every position, but they got enough guys that they can beat just about anybody.
Well, and the funny thing about it, right, is that I think that Jim Heacock, their defense coordinator, might be one of the most underrated coaches in America. Because you look
I
at what's
agree.
happened across the Big 12, all these moves to a three-man front and sending so many guys back in coverage. I mean, this is all Jim Heacock, right? Like the whole Big 12 defensive, sort of landscape right now has been defined by him because of the success they were able to have there, especially, that first year against Oklahoma, obviously. So I think that defensively they bring back so much. They bring back a lot of contributors who are going to be able to cause some issues for Big 12 defenses. And the thing that you hope can maybe take them to that next level is Brock Purdy, maybe taking the step from being a really good quarterback to one of the nation's best quarterbacks. And I think that you look at what he's been able to do his first 2 years at Iowa State. I mean, it's pretty incredible that Matt Campbell's been able to get so much out of him. And I think that you look at the teams that usually compete for the Big 12, you're looking at teams that have experienced quarterback situations. And on top of that, I mean, I really like their young running back who broke out for them last year as well. So they have a chance to be a pretty complete team as well, I think. And look, it's always a tough thing for for teams that don't necessarily have those 4 and 5 star guys to break into the Big 12 title conversation. But you look at how well they've been coached the last couple of years. I think that this team is just ready for a breakout.
I think the fun thing about the bottom six or the six teams below those four in the Big 12 is it gives everybody a chance to pick their sleeper. Because I think there's a lot, like you said earlier, you talked about balance. I think there's a lot of balance in the bottom six. I mean, even Kansas is. I mean, they're not. They're going to probably finish 10th, but they've got just enough guys and Les Miles enthusiasm that they might surprise a few people. But you and I picked. Those are your picks. I'm trusting in the magazine.
Yes.
Okay. You and I picked the bye. Well, actually, you picked most of the league the same. I had Iowa State third, Texas fourth, and then I had West Virginia, who you have ninth. I had them fifth, and I had Baylor ninth. I'm really concerned about Baylor just because all the losses defensively and no spring football for a brand new head coach and a quarterback that I mean Charlie got beat up a bunch. I'm concerned about him. But West Virginia is my sleeper because we saw them late in the year last year up in Morgantown, and I thought Jarrett Deggy was the right answer for them at quarterback. And for Neil Brown, I think he's going to be great. Neil coached his older brother at Tech, and then the Stills on defense, and everybody voted. I mean, not everybody, but enough people voted Darius the defensive player of the year preseason, the Big 12. I just think Neil Brown is going to surprise some people, and I tell you what, I think Matt Wells at Tech could surprise. I just think you could pick a team in that bottom six, and you could make a case for them to be the rising star.
Yeah, and I think that you mentioned all those teams. You don't even necessarily mention Kansas State, who was really impressive. I think in Chris Kleiman's first season as well. Honestly, I look at that bottom group and I see. Again, you mentioned Kansas probably going to finish 10th, but any of the teams that are 5 through 9, I think that they could finish in any order. And honestly, a whole bunch of them could jump into that top group too if some things went right. You mentioned Texas Tech. I think that Texas Tech, people don't realize how close they were to to having a much better first season. I mean, we're talking about 5 fourth quarter games, I believe, that went
Yeah,
down the wire.
yeah, we do. We do. At Oklahoma State, I think we saw Texas Tech at their absolute best last year, and Spencer Sanders at his absolute worst
Right,
with
right.
5 turnovers. Yeah, okay.
Right. So this is a team that wasn't that far away last year. It's easy to look at 4-8 and think that they just took this giant step back, but they have a lot returning on both sides of the ball. Jack Anderson, obviously back on the offensive line, is going to be huge for them, but Alan Bowman at quarterback, back from injuries will be even bigger. So I think that they have a chance if they can find a way to replace some of the guys that they lost on defense, guys like Jordan Brooks, guys like Douglas Coleman. If they can find some contributors there, look, this team could be a whole lot better. And like you mentioned with West Virginia, if they can kind of just get some consistency at the quarterback position, I think that all of a sudden everything's open to them.
All right. The cover is SMU, which, you know what, I kind of thought that was cool because SMU did have a really fun season last year. I actually caught a couple of their games. I will say this. Now, where'd you grow up?
I'm from the Dallas area.
Okay, see, I am too. I'm a lot older than you are. I went to WT White, and I'm a Dallas guy. In fact, my dad worked for the city of Dallas. So when SMU broke out that uniform that you've got on the cover that Shane Buechele's wearing, the Dallas tribute, I'm like, okay, those are as cool as it gets. Those are pretty cool uniforms. But talk about the decision to put Buechele and SMU on the cover of Texas football.
Yeah, that's a great question. And so for us, when we sit down to try to do this, we try to look and find the biggest story in Texas college football, right? And what that means sometimes varies year to year. Sometimes it means the best team in the state. Sometimes it means the most interesting team in the state. But sometimes they're just perfect storms. And I think that when you look at what Shane Buechele was able to do, coming obviously from having kind of failed at Texas, having lost the job, having been benched, having been kind of thrown aside, and for him to come to SMU and not just do nice things, because like there have been players who've done some nice things at SMU over the last 30 years, but to take them to 10 wins for the first time since 1984 and be on the cover of this magazine for the first time since 1983. I mean, this is historic stuff, right? Like I think that it's easy to take it for granted because they didn't maybe make the New Year's Six because they came just short of playing for a conference title, but this is the first time that this stuff has happened in more than 30 years, and I think that you just look at what Buechele was able to bring to that team, and you listen to the way that every single individual person at SMU talks about Shane Buechele and what he brought both on and off the field. I mean, for us, it was a pretty easy decision, honestly.
By the way, people, when you if you don't have your Texas football yet, you can get them. It's in Barnes and Nobles. I mean, the best way is to subscribe to the website, and then you can go on there anytime you want, get info. But if you don't have yours yet, when you do get it, just peruse. And Shehan did a lot of work on this. His byline is in there a bunch. And you did the Big 12 schools. I'm kind of thumbing through here, so I'm going to kind of hit you real quick. Kind of almost like whatever comes to your mind first. Baylor Bears.
It's going to be rebuilding. It's going to be dynamic offense, though. I think that Larry Fedora is going to be tremendous for them.
Aha. See, that's the thing. Mike Gundy leads the league in offensive coordinators in the conference and really around the country because he's got Todd Monken at Georgia. He's got Mike Yurcich at Texas. He's got Larry Fedora at Baylor. Of course, Dana Holgerson. And that really, he's a Mike Leach guy, really. He's not as much a Mike Gundy guy, but he's the head coach at Houston. All right, TCU.
Quarterback questions. I think that if they can get something from that position, they could be special, but they need to get a whole lot more than what they got last year.
All right, Texas Longhorns.
Consistency, because we saw what they could do last year against Utah and LSU, and they just got to be able to do it for 12 games.
All right. And folks, they do, I love this, they do give a little homage to the out-of-staters with a special regional rivals page, 2 pages that has LSU and Arkansas out of the SEC and Oklahoma and Oklahoma State north of the Red River, previews on those 2 teams. But there's national previews. I skipped Texas Tech because you kind of hit on Texas Tech pretty good there. All right, last thing. I know it's not Big 12, it's SEC, but what about the Aggies? We saw them in the bowl game, and yeah, I thought, they got enough pieces coming back next year. Of course, they did get a little bad news in the form of probation in the offseason, but what do you think about A&M heading into 2020?
Well, I think that most people who watched A&M last year, the biggest thing that stood out was their schedule. Their schedule was basically impossible. They played 4 top 5 teams. I mean, what are you supposed to do about that?
Yeah.
Well, this year, they get the opposite of that. They have one of the easiest schedules that honestly, I mean, they exist in college football this year. And probably the easiest that you'll ever get playing in the SEC West, because they get most of a rebuilding SEC West. Obviously, LSU and Alabama still sort of the big teams, but they're replacing a whole lot. And they play Vanderbilt across the conference, and they play South Carolina across the conference. And they also had a game against Colorado that obviously has been canceled at this point with the Pac-12 moving to conference only. But this is as easy a schedule, I think, as Texas A&M's ever going to get in this conference. And it comes at a good time with them bringing back a whole lot of production on both sides of the ball. So if Texas A&M is going to make that move and really compete for an SEC title, I mean, I think that this is as good a year as any if they're going to be able to do it.
Yeah, I hope Greg Tepper made sure you got a big paycheck because, like I said, you young man, you wrote a lot of stuff in here. Last thought, I don't know if you watched the College Football Live State of the Season on ESPN last night, but we're all, the news in Texas was earth-shattering yesterday, moving 5A and 6A back a month. I'm optimistic. I think we're going to have in the Big 12. I think we're going to have a full season. I think it'll be bumpy, but I think we'll have it. And I almost kind of think it'll start on time. What do you think? Right now, what's your gut feeling?
It's a tough question for me, especially for me being in Texas and being in Dallas, one of the hot spots right now. I mean,
Yeah.
we really need to see some good news. We really need to see, you know, people following the protocols, and we need to see people wearing masks. We need to see the case numbers going down. But here's the thing, though, right? Is that especially if we're losing some of the non-conference slate, that does give us a couple extra weeks to work with. It pushes things a little bit more towards the end of September, and I think that if we start looking towards more of the end of September, which is obviously the news yesterday with high school, I mean that's more of where the 5A and 6A high schools are going. There's reasons for optimism. I think that the testing numbers have started to become pretty encouraging on campuses, on Big 12 campuses. And look, will we make it to the end of the season? I think that's sort of the big question. But the best thing that anybody can do, obviously, is try to follow the protocols, try to distance, try to wear a mask, and try to prevent this thing from spreading as much as possible. And hopefully, hopefully we can get at least some college football.
Yeah, I tell you, it will be a really. I mean, this has been strange to begin with, but it'll get really strange if there's no college football. That's
Couldn't
that's
agree
gonna
more.
that's gonna rock our world, Shehan. I'm telling you. Hey, I appreciate you coming on, and again, like I said, great work. I mean, you killed it here. I mean, there's the only thing you could have done is tell me you wrote every one of the high school previews, and I'm pretty sure you didn't do that.
No, we got a great team of people over there who help with that. But I'll tell you what, this is a real labor of love. I mean, we start putting this together really like at the end of February, and our deadline isn't until May. So we're putting in a good 3 months of work into this magazine to put it together, and we're really proud every year of what we're able to do. So thank you so
Yeah.
much for reading, and make sure and pick it up.
Oh yeah, and I'm just I mean I tell folks all the time. I said, yeah, I grew up with this. Like I said, I grew up knowing Dave Campbell, and in fact one of the greatest highlights of my life. And I think I had a little advantage since he was the publisher. But when I was in high school and I got my little square picture back in the high school section, I was like, oh
Oh yeah.
man, I got a picture in Texas football. That's pretty good, man. Okay. Anyway, hey Shehan, again, great work. Like I said, I think your name is in this magazine probably more than anybody else's. As much work, and you deserved it. As much work as you put in. So, hopefully, I'll see you down the line in the Big 12 season, and we can fist bump and then socially distance.
Awesome. Looking forward to it. Thanks so much for having me on.
All right, Shehan Jeyarajah, and again.